Republican Tyler Sirois is running for an open seat in Florida House District 51, covering North Central Brevard. His main platform is increasing vocational and technical training at schools. If elected, he will also be expected to get state funds to clean up the Indian River Lagoon. Welcome to I Am Brevard. I'm Isadora Rangel. After a bitter primary against Cocoa Mayor Henry Parrish, Sirois is now running against Democrat and former Cocoa Mayor Mike Blake on November 6. We invited Mr. Blake for a separate interview. He told us he couldn't make it because of his busy campaign schedule. Here's my conversation with Sirois. Tyler Sirois, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to learn more about yourself before we start. Who is Tyler Sirois and why are you running for Florida House District 51 covering Merritt Island, Cocoa Beach?
Well, again, thank you very much for the invitation. My name's Tyler Sirois. I'm a Republican candidate running for the Florida House of Representatives, the seat that's currently held by Tom Goodson. I was born at Cape Canaveral Hospital, went to Brevard Public Schools, graduated from Cocoa Beach High in 2003, went off to Florida State where I met my wife Katie, enjoyed our time together in Tallahassee, and then came home and started our family. I have two children. My daughter Emma Kate is 4 and my son Jack is 2. Really excited about this race. I feel like as a lifelong resident, as a professional here in our community, I have an opportunity to lend a different perspective to the Florida legislature. So I'm looking forward to getting started.
So probably your main platform is bringing back vocational training to schools. Yes. Can you explain what you mean by that and how can the legislature achieve that?
Sure.
At a state level?
Well, one of the areas where I think our legislature has gone too far are some of the reforms that we've made in education. And we have said that our teachers and our schools are not successful if you don't go to college. I think that is wrong. We need to change that message and make it more about contribution. Young people need to be empowered to find something that they're passionate about and then have the resources and go to pursue that dream. Certainly through my work at the State Attorney's Office and my involvement with the Children's Advocacy Center, we know that young people who are engaged in the workforce, who have a job, are less likely to get in trouble or to turn to harmful substances. So what I want to see is the legislature to scale back some of those testing requirements and assessments and provide more resources to young people who decide they want to be a welder or a plumber or go into nursing and begin to provide those opportunities sooner.
And are you saying putting more money into vocational training opportunities? Or I remember once you said that you would like businesses
Yes.
also to get involved.
Yeah, it's going to take both. It's going to be a commitment of resources on the state's part, but I also want to partner with businesses, some of our great corporate leaders here in our community, to provide apprenticeship programs so young people have the opportunity to come in, maybe spend part of their day at school and then spend the second half of the day working on cars or apprenticing with an electrician.
And how do you provide incentives for business to actually put skin in the game? We're talking tax incentives?
Tax breaks, tax incentives, absolutely. You know, for businesses that are willing to step up and provide those opportunities, I think that we should incentivize that contribution.
And let's move on to likely the #1 issue in your district in Brevard County, which is the Indian River Lagoon.
Right.
And you tie it to protecting property values, which obviously makes a lot of sense. But what can the legislature do about this? And what should the legislature do about this? And we see Brevard has put a lot of skin in the game. We have a half-cent sales tax just to clean up the lagoon. I think the feeling is the state hasn't done its part. So what should the state do here?
Well, and you have educated me a great deal on the subject because I've read some of your articles previously.
Thank you.
And I'm a believer in meeting the promise of the Florida Land Acquisition Trust Fund. When the state created that trust fund, they said, and when the voters approved that referendum, the language said very specifically that this trust fund would be used for the improvement, protection and rehabilitation of environmentally endangered lands. The legislature's not done that. They've used those dollars to plug holes in the reoccurring budgets of state agencies that have an environmental impact. So in my mind, that's a bit of a bait and switch. Some people might consider that the same thing happened with the lottery. But what I want to do is make sure that those dollars are focused on the lagoon and the improvement of the lagoon. And I'll file legislation to allocate those dollars for that purpose.
Are we talking? There was a bill that was proposed by Senator Mayfield, who's also from Brevard, and that would allocate $50 million annually for the lagoon through Amendment 1. Is that something that you would be considering?
I would support
sponsoring?
that, absolutely, and see if we could bump it up a little bit.
Yeah, and Amendment 1 has been such an interesting issue. There is a lawsuit that was filed against the legislature because they say that they're not living up to the amendment's intent. But having been there for 3-4 sessions, there was not a lot of willingness from your party to change how they spend those dollars.
Right.
Can one person make a difference in the House?
I'm going to try. I'm going to give it a shot. You know, I don't intend to go up and to serve leadership in the House. I intend to go up and to serve my constituency in the House. And Land Acquisition Trust Fund is one part of this discussion. You know, we're just beginning to understand the nature of the problems around Patrick Air Force Base and Satellite Beach and Cocoa Beach in my House district. At some point, the federal government, I think, is going to have potentially a contribution to make as well in terms of cleaning up our water.
Do you think the state should get involved with these cancer-causing chemicals that were found around the base?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if it's a federal issue, you know, in Brevard County, it's unique. Our largest waterfront property in Brevard County is the federal government. And we're starting to see these kinds of issues where cancer, carcinogens are being found in animal, wildlife around the Space Center. We're just beginning to see the tip of the iceberg, I believe, in terms of a federal responsibility to pitch in here.
All right, so I want to move on now to school security. You said in a previous interview that you wouldn't have voted for the Marjorie Stoneman bill
Right.
because of its gun control provisions.
Right.
And just to clarify, those provisions include a waiting period for the purchase of firearms, banning bump stocks, and raising the age limit to buy a gun to 21. Why would you not have voted for that bill, and what's wrong with these provisions?
Well, those provisions do nothing to stop the real issue here. Those provisions, had they been in place before Parkland, would have done nothing to stop that assailant from attacking that school. You know, one of the things that we need to do is refocus, and the bill goes part way. I would have gone further in terms of addressing some of the mental health deficiencies in our state. Florida ranks 49 out of 50 states in terms of public resources devoted to mental health, and I think that's beginning to show in some of these situations that we're seeing around our state where people are committing acts of violence. You know, guns are the convenient thing to point to, but it could have been a bomb, it could have been a truck, it could have been a knife. All of those are examples that we've seen elsewhere. One of the things that I want to do as a legislator is provide more resources to our teachers to be able to spot things like social isolationism, bullying, and the behaviors that students are exhibiting where they really need help.
So you're saying the money in that bill was not enough for mental health?
No, it wasn't enough for mental health.
And so I want to talk about bump stocks because, I mean, even the NRA was entertaining the idea of supporting a bump stock ban, and then that never came to fruition. They changed their stance sort of on this issue. Would you ever support bringing back bump stocks and to legalize them again?
I don't support any restrictions on firearms, and I think for me, the issue really isn't about any particular piece of equipment or hardware. For me, the issue is that what you do is when you create legislation like that, you are penalizing law-abiding citizens from exercising their constitutional liberties. Good people, responsible people follow the law, and you don't have issues. When you have individuals who are mentally ill, number one, they're going to gain access to that equipment. If they want to get their hands on it, they're going to find it, whether it's banned or not. You'll have a black market of that material being sold and available to people. But the other issue is criminals disregard the law. They're criminals. That's what they do. So I don't know that banning those things really helps, and I think it creates a slippery slope or a precedent where you could ban potentially future materials.
But can't you say that about anything? About drugs? You can ban them and people will still get them. Should we legalize
and they do.
Everything?
And they do. That's the nature of criminality.
And so you said that, and just to get more on your stance on guns, you said that we have to start looking at soft targets and that citizens should be ready to defend themselves. There have been proposals, for example, to allow guns on college campuses and open carry. Would that be something that you would support?
Yes, both.
Okay. So I want to move on to another top issue, which...
Can I make a point, though,
sure,
on the issue of firearms? You know, I think it's important that we look at the nature of the threats that we as citizens face today. And the sheriff and I have talked extensively about this. We have to start rethinking when we're at a restaurant on Friday night, or you're at the movie theater, which we've already seen in Colorado. And we have to understand that when those kinds of acts of violence are taking place, the way to effectively end it and to save lives in the most efficient and very rapid sense is for citizens who are able to defend themselves. I think we've all heard before when seconds matter, the police are minutes away, and that's something I think we all have to start taking more to heart.
And I think you've been on record as supporting the Guardian program, which was part of the Marjorie-Stoneman bill as well, to allow certain employees, not all of them, to carry guns
for fiscal reasons. For fiscal reasons as well, I think it's a creative solution. When a budget is restricted.
All right, so I want to talk about healthcare with you because that is the #1 issue on the minds of voters, according to recent polling. What do you support in terms of expanding coverage for those who are uninsured? And what can the legislature do? There are many proposals, including Medicaid expansion, so I want to hear your thoughts about that. And if you oppose that, what should the legislature do?
Well, I do oppose the expansion, but I think there's things the legislature can do to create an environment where there's more and greater access to care. One of the things that I've talked about throughout the course of this campaign is telehealth, the ability of people to reach a physician over the phone and to get some basic assessment. I think the other thing that we need to take a look at is reduce the restrictions on the ability of businesses to create employee healthcare clinics, so they can, or a group of businesses can get together and create a healthcare clinic for some of their employees. One of the things that I've learned about recently that I need to learn more about is the ability of pharmacists to be able to offer some basic testing. Does it make sense for you to be able to go into your pharmacist and be tested for the flu and to get a prescription?
And that bill failed this year.
It did, and I think that's something that has merit that we all need to learn more about in terms of opportunity. But the healthcare needs in our state are extensive. We've knocked on over 7,000 doors during this campaign. People are deeply concerned about memory care, our hospitals and healthcare system being prepared to service Alzheimer's patients. A lot of folks have some very serious needs in terms of disabilities. The Medicaid waiver program is something that you have a waiting list of 12 years for people to get those services. So there's some serious things the legislature needs to take a look at.
And why do you oppose Medicaid expansion?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but ultimately I'm concerned about the tax burden that it creates. One of the things that I need to do as a legislator is to be focused on being responsible with taxpayer dollars and really starting to try to keep some of these entitlement programs in check. Not my wheelhouse, but the national debt is on track to be 100% of GDP.
Yeah.
If we're not looking at that as a crisis, we're not understanding the full measure of what's going on here in terms of spending.
And obviously we've been hearing a lot about the uninsured people who cannot afford to even go to a doctor in the first place because they can't afford insurance. What can the legislature do to ensure that these people can afford insurance and can get health coverage?
Well, I'm not sure that it's a question or a mandate of what can the legislature do to make sure these folks have insurance. I think that we have to provide flexibility in the marketplace for people to make choices that best suit them and their own economic conditions. A young person has much different healthcare needs. Maybe has to only go see the doctor once a year, and a walk-in clinic is fine, versus someone who's more advanced in age that has continuous healthcare needs. So I think we have to recognize that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of healthcare, and individuals really are suited to make the best decision for them.
And Ron DeSantis, the Republican candidate who's running for governor, said in a recent debate on CNN that he would sign a bill to protect people with pre-existing conditions if needed. Would you support that bill?
Yes, absolutely.
And can you explain why?
Well, I think that it's a matter of fairness. In some respects, it's a issue of equity, and I don't want to see people be restricted to receiving the care that they need because of a pre-existing condition. I don't think that that's helping to solve the problem.
And I want to talk a little bit about the top of the ticket, which is the gubernatorial race. And we see Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum are neck and neck pretty much. I think no one can really predict who's going to win that race. But let's start with a Ron DeSantis scenario. If he wins, what are some of the things that you would like to push in Tallahassee if you have Republican House and probably the Senate and the governor's mansion?
Right. Well, fortunately, Congressman DeSantis, I think, has established himself in a very strong way in terms of water issues. He's been involved in what's been going on with the Everglades. He's been very vocal about some of the issues that have been going on, and in terms of what we need to do to address some of those issues. I think that Brevard County will have an ally in Governor DeSantis in terms of working on the lagoon, addressing some of our own water quality issues here, and being able to resolve some of those problems.
Now let's a different scenario, which
Sure.
I'm sure you wouldn't be very pleased with. If Andrew Gillum wins, he's defines himself as a democratic socialist, I believe that's the term. He wants to push for Medicaid expansion. He supports Medicare for all at the federal level. How can the House work with a liberal governor?
Right.
Do you see a way for that to happen?
In some respects, yes. I think that the lagoon, again, is certainly something. The wonderful thing about that as an issue is you can look at it through purely an environmental lens. You can look at it through an economic lens. I talk a lot about the effects on property values. So I think that an argument and approach can be made in terms of getting a Governor Gillum on board in understanding that the lagoon is a priority. But that being said, there are very deep philosophical differences between myself and Andrew Gillum. I believe in the power of the individual. I believe in personal liberty. I believe in keeping taxes low so businesses and families can thrive. And I'm disturbed, frankly, when you have a candidate talking about raising the corporate income tax by 40%, raising or creating a state income tax, which I think would be devastating to Florida's economy.
I don't think he said that he wants to create an income tax.
Well, perhaps alluded to it. We'll have to.
How did he allude to it?
Well, I think that the argument on his part has been saying things like Floridians need to pay more, Floridians should pay their fair share. For some of the things that he's listed as a priority, I don't understand how you accomplish those without the revenue that an income tax would bring in. So, those are things that I understand he's looking at or interested in that I find troubling.
I'm sure he's going to disagree with you on the income tax portion, but we'll move on to education, which is a very important issue here in Brevard. Right. You see teachers fighting for raises every year, and I think very people would disagree that teachers should be making more money. The question is, how do you pay for it? Any suggestions on how we can increase their salaries?
Well, one of the things that I think we need to do is scale back some of the burdens and responsibilities. We need to make the job fun again. We've created all these testing requirements. We've created all these evaluations and accountability measures. Some of them are warranted, but not all of them. So I think if we can bring that focus back to vocational technical training, reduce some of those testing burdens in our classrooms, we can certainly improve the culture and make it a more positive work experience for our teachers. In terms of financing, I think there's things that we can do to be creative. Certainly the creation of a special trust fund or something that would be available as a funding mechanism to support our teachers would be an ideal situation. But as we've seen before, the legislature has shown a willingness to raid trust funds to meet other priorities. So ideally that would be the route that I'd like to go, but I don't know that that's the easy answer at this point.
Yeah, there's no easy answer for this issue, and we see other states grappling with the same issue. I want to talk about economic development because that is such a huge issue in Brevard. As you know, our space industry is booming, and some people will argue it is because of the work that the Economic Development Commission has done to attract companies. Some people will disagree with that, saying that those companies would have come here regardless of incentives. So I want to know your stance on providing tax and cash incentives to companies.
I support those kinds of programs when they include what's known as clawback provisions. So you write provisions into the contract where if certain benchmarks aren't being met, then you end the deal, you terminate the agreement. I would go a step further in light of some of the things that we've seen locally in terms of confidentiality that is often written into those contracts. I think when a contract is breached, confidentiality should end at that point, so taxpayers, citizens, understand the commitment that was being made and what was failed and why the contract was terminated as a result. There's perhaps no greater poster child for those kinds of programs in Brevard County. When the shuttle program came to an end, it was an all-hands-on-deck effort to go out and to try to attract and to retain businesses that are here locally. I'm also a big supporter of the governor's Quick Action Closing Fund. That's the ability, and one thing that we should celebrate about Rick Scott is that he very aggressively would go out to other states, New York, California, and try to recruit businesses to come here to Florida.
And he had a fight with the outgoing Speaker of the House over Enterprise Florida.
Right.
And a lot of Republicans believe that it's giving cash incentives and tax incentives is corporate welfare. Where would you have stood in that fight had you been in the legislature at that time?
You know, every state agency, I think, has places where they can cut back and be more conservative, be better stewards of taxpayer dollars. But you know, as a legislator from Brevard County, I would have had to vote to support Enterprise Florida. It's just done too much here locally. Linda Weatherman, the folks at our EDC have done a great deal of work in terms of protecting our local economy, making sure that we have a great workforce here, that property values remain strong. So I'm a big believer, I'm a supporter in those programs if they have the kind of clawback provision that I'm talking about.
Sure. So now I want to talk a little bit about the elections. You're currently living outside of your district in West Melbourne, and you say you plan to move to Merritt Island, which is in District 51. Can you talk about your plans of moving back to the district,
Sure.
which is where you were
Sure,
born?
I'm in transition, and I don't know where Merritt Island, that was in the voter guide that I think was published. Merritt Island was where I grew up and was born and raised. We've owned a place in Cocoa since 2008.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
We've owned a place in Cocoa since 2008, so I'm in transition. We've surrendered our homestead exemption in our transition to Cocoa. You know, but one of the things that I'd point out, you know, like I said, in addition to being born and raised in my house district, going to public schools in my house district, these legislative district boundaries change every 10 years. In 4 years, they will do redistricting that will have all 120 members of the House evaluating, you know, where they live in the state and what their situation is. So, you know, one of the things that is important to me, going down this rabbit hole of redistricting briefly, is really, you know, I want to be a part of that process. We need to make these district boundaries much more simplified. I think it's fair to say that a district boundary should have 5, you know, geographic sides to it, and not these gerrymandered things that you see around the state. So that's something that I'd like to be involved with.
Would you ever support, I think, obviously there were lawsuits filed against the legislature over gerrymandering of these districts, which and gerrymandering basically means you draw a district to benefit one party.
Right.
Would you ever support having a third entity draw those districts instead of the legislature?
No, I mean, elections have consequences, and the legislature needs to have that authority. We don't need to grow the bureaucracy or create another commission to do this. But I think if we can put some standards in place and say what's fair, what is a correct way to draw these districts in terms of people's representation. You know, we used to have a district in Brevard County. It was House District 29, and it ran from Mims up in the north end of the county down to Vero Beach, and it was basically everything west of I-95.
Okay.
And that, you know, the needs of the folks in Vero Beach are much different in terms of representation than what people in Scottsmore or Mims need. So there's I think, a more common sense way to draw these boundaries. And as a member of the Republican Party and somebody seeking office, we need to win elections because we have better ideas. And we need to win elections because we make a better argument, not because the lines were drawn, you know, more favorably.
Yeah. And so I want to ask you about President Trump. This is obviously a local race, but if you're reading what's going on in politics throughout the country, is everything has become nationalized in a sense that a lot of the issues are actually national issues, even in local races. So I want to know, how does President Trump play into your race, and do you see him helping you or potentially harming Republicans?
You know, I haven't, believe it or not, I haven't given a whole lot of thought or attention to what is going on nationally in the context of my House race. You know, I'm focused on very much on local issues, the lagoon, vocational technical training, mental health. You know, certainly there's the president is contributing to the atmospheric, you know, elements, the tension, people's attention and passion about the election. But you know, I'm not going door to door talking about those kinds of things. I think that one thing that people admire about the president, or can at least acknowledge, is that he doesn't hold anything back. You know, he tells us what's on his mind, and you can like it or not like it, but you know where he stands.
What are the main issues that people bring up to you when you knock on their doors?
Well, locally, memory care, you know, our hospitals being prepared for Alzheimer's, people very concerned about the lagoon. I had people across Sykes Creek on Merritt Island very eager to take me out into their backyard to look at the canals. I've heard the term a lot. People are concerned about paralysis by analysis, that we're taking too much time talking about it and studying it and not actually doing things that are impactful. Everybody's got a theory on the lagoon. We need to cut a new inlet. I've heard urban legends about how if we put giant bales of barley, I think I was told, out in the lagoon, that will sop up all of the muck and take care of it.
That's an interesting
yeah, I mean,
theory.
everybody's got theories, and you know, one of the things that I'm interested to do is after the election, you know, let's hold a workshop with the legislative delegation, the county commission, folks from the Lagoon Coalition, and all touch base and kind of revisit this issue, understand what our priorities are, what do I need to be doing in Tallahassee to serve the interests of our lagoon, and how can we all build a better collaboration locally and at the state level in terms of what we need to do.
Awesome. Tyler, we're running out of time, but I want to thank you for being
Thank
here.
you. Thanks
and
for having me.
Good luck on November 6th.
Thank you very much.
That's it for Eye on Brevard. Go to Florida Today's YouTube channel to watch all of our episodes. I'll see you again next week. Join me on election night for our live results coverage. I'm Isadora Rangel with Florida Today, and I'll moderate a roundtable discussion about state and local results. Joining me will be Eastern Florida State College political science professor Chris Muro and political insiders from both parties. We'll cover the governor's race, U.S. Senate, and the major Brevard County races. Tune in starting at 7 p.m. on November 6th on WEFS and FloridaToday.com.